It is my duty, it is my honor to prepare you for the part you must play in this great war. Our homeland has need of men of character and strong will. It is my duty to prepare your minds so that you will be better able to train your bodies for your Kaiser, for your fatherland, for your God. For upon you rests the fate of the fatherland, and upon the fate of the fatherland rests the fate of the world. Germany is the nation of progress, the nation of culture, the nation of science, the nation of ideas, the nation of Beethoven, of Schiller, of Goethe, Bauman. What is that?
A bird, sir.
A bird?
Yes, sir.
A lark?
Yes, sir, a lark.
Yes, very good.
It was on the window ledge, sir.
This line is...
The window.
Very exact.
Thank you, sir.
But you do not come to class to make little drawings or to write little poems or to dream, do you, Papa? Sit down.
All Quiet on the Western Front is a novel written by Erich Maria Remarque, a German veteran of World War I. This novel describes the experience of German soldiers' extreme physical and mental stress during the war, and the detachment from civilian life felt by many of these soldiers upon returning home from the front. In this novel, we follow the story of Paul Baumer, a young man of 19 who enlisted in the German army with several of his friends from school. Over the course of the novel, Paul and his comrades learn that war is not glorious or honorable, and that the nationalism and patriotism are simple, empty cliches that are used by people of power to influence others. The three main themes of the novel that will be discussed are the horror of war, the effect of war on a soldier, and finally, nationalism and political power. The overriding theme of All Quiet on the Western Front is the terrible brutality of war, which informs every scene of the novel, whereas war novels before All Quiet on the Western Front tended to romanticize what war was like, emphasizing ideas such as adventure, honor, glory, and patriotic duty. All Quiet on the Western Front portrayed war what it truly was like, an ungodly hellscape. It did this by replacing the romantic picture of glory and heroism with a decidedly unromantic vision of fear, meaninglessness, and butchery. In many ways, the First World War demanded this depiction more than any other war before it. The reason it demanded this depiction is because the First World War was the first full-scale conflict of the modern era. It completely altered mankind's conception of military conflict with its catastrophic levels of carnage, destruction, and violence. Its battles lasted for months, and new technological advances in warfare saw their first uses. Weapons like the machine gun could lay waste to a whole frontal assault, and poison gas such as chlorine could lead to soldiers coughing up pieces of their own lungs. There was also artillery pieces that led to constant shelling of enemy positions. All of these fast technological advances in warfare meant that there was little time for military doctrines of major military powers to change. This led to higher officers using outdated tactics such as cavalry charges or bayonet charges, which would be stopped by a hail of machine gun fire. Remarque's novel dramatizes these aspects of the First World War and portrays their mind-numbing terror and savagery of war with a relentless focus on the physical and psychological damage that it causes. At the end of the novel, almost every major character has been killed, epitomizing the war's devastating effect on the generation of young men that were forced to fight in it. The second theme that will be discussed is the ruinous effect that war has on the common soldier. In war, especially the Great War, men were subject to constant physical danger, as they could literally be blown to pieces at any moment. That intense physical threat also serves as an uneasing attack on the nerves, forcing soldiers into a state of primal instinctive fear during every waking moment. In addition to the bombardment of artillery and threat of incoming attacks, the soldiers lived in the appalling conditions that were the trenches. The trenches were wet and muddy, along with being infested with rats and lice. The soldiers also frequently went without food and sleep and adequate clothing, or sufficient medical care. Remarque portrays the overall effect of these conditions as a crippling overload of panic and despair. The only way soldiers are to survive is for them to disconnect themselves from their feelings and rely on pure instinct and accept the conditions that they reside in. In Remarque's view, this emotional disconnection has a hugely destructive impact on soldiers' humanity. For instance, Paul becomes unable to imagine a future where the war is over, and he has trouble remembering how he felt before the Great War. He also loses the ability to speak with his family members. Soldiers no longer stop to mourn fallen comrades. At the beginning of the novel, Kamarish, one of his friends, is on his deathbed. The most pressing question among all of his comrades is who will inherit his boots. Among the living soldiers, however, Remarque portrays an intense bond of camaraderie and loyalty that spring up as a result of the shared experience of the Great War. These feelings are the only romanticized element of the novel, and virtually the only emotions that soldiers have that preserve their fundamental humanity.
Days and weeks and months and years. Attack, counterattack, and the dead pile up. Winter, summer. The days are hot and the dead lie unburied. The shells will bury them. But when the wind blows towards us, it brings the smell of blood, which is heavy and sweet.
In many ways, the precipitating cause of the First World War was the ethic of nationalism, the idea that competing nation-states were a fundamental part of existence, that one owed one's first loyalty to one's nation, and that one's identity was the primary component of one's overall identity. The ethic of nationalism was not new, but it had reached new heights of intensity in the 19th century. And this fervor generally carried over to the start of the First World War. In its depiction of the horror of war, All Quiet on the Western Front presents a scathing critique of the idea of nationalism, showing it to be a hollow, hypocritical ideology, a tool used by those in power to control a nation's populace. Paul and his friends are seduced into joining the army by nationalist ideas, but the experience of fighting quickly schools them into nationalism's irrelevance in the face of the war's horrors. The relative worthlessness of the battlefield of the patriots Kensreck and Himmelstoss accentuates the inappropriateness of outmoded ideas in modern warfare. Remarque illustrates that soldiers on the front don't fight for glory of their nation, but rather for their own survival. They kill to keep themselves from being killed. Additionally, Paul and his friends do not consider the opposing armies to be their real enemies. In their view, their real enemies are the men in power in their own nation, who they believe have sacrificed them to the war to simply increase their own power and glory. Although I enjoyed this novel, and now the film, it is still very depressing as you get to know the characters of the novel deeply. However, this does not save them from the fate of many soldiers during the First World War. Reading this novel has given me insight to the many people who have needlessly perished in terrible conflicts, and not just the First World War, but also other conflicts and wars. This novel has also shown that humans are capable of doing terrible things to one another in the face of combat, as I remember Paul speaking to himself after killing a French soldier, saying, "If it weren't for this war, we could have been brothers." Overall, after reading the novel and now recently watching the film, I thoroughly enjoyed the story that Erich Maria Remarque was trying to tell. It was a true-to-life depiction of the First World War and how truly brutal and unfair it was. This is because there were so many young men that had their lives taken away, just because those in power decided to have a war.